Dzień dobry. Great to be here. Okay. So quick ground rule. For this presentation, when I use the word startup, I'm not referring to ping pong tables and beer kegs. I'm referring to new products, new companies, and specifically disruptive innovation. So to give me a sense for the room, can you guys raise your hand if you work at a company that is older than, has been in business longer than 16 years? Can you raise your hand if your business you work for has been in business longer than 16 years? Okay, great. So for those of you that just raised your hand, you are older than the average of the 500 most valuable companies in the world. So just to give you some perspective, your company is older than the average of the 500 most valuable companies. Now, that's not really a big deal unless you look at the fact that the average age used to be 60 years. So this is the average age of the S&P 500 companies. And if you graduated college in the 90s or early 2000s, when you graduated college, this average age would be 25 years, so close to 10 years older. And if you graduated college in the 70s or 80s, and maybe this might be one of your bosses, then they would have started their careers when the average age was 35. So a 20-year difference, almost a 20-year difference from today. Now, what is the cause of this? So one thing that we do know is that it is easier than ever before to start a new company. It has never been cheaper, it has never been easier, and never before have we had access to such levels of distribution through social media. So we are in a golden age of entrepreneurship. And this can be represented by companies like Twitter, who in 8 years reached a $29 billion valuation. Obviously, market capitalization is based not only on profit, but also on growth. And so older companies make more profit, but what they really lack is most often growth. And so Twitter in 8 years, Lending Club in 7 years reached a $5 billion valuation, and Uber in 5 years reached an $18 billion valuation. But these companies are not the exception. In fact, today there is over 40 startups valued at over $1 billion. Now, if we look at some of the older companies that we all know, we see that they are going through some turmoil. So HP recently, their valuation dropped to $20 billion after being in business for 75 years. American Airlines and GM as well have been going through trouble. Not to mention Kodak and Barnes & Noble, which we both know are filed for bankruptcy. So this is the other weird thing. Facebook, while providing very little value to human beings and humankind, is worth more than Disney, the company that inspired us all at young ages. It's also worth more than IBM and Coca-Cola. So this is the age that we live in today. And about 20 years ago, this book, The Innovator's Dilemma, told us that there's two kinds of innovation. There is sustaining innovation and disruptive innovation. So first we need to get on the same page that this presentation is going to talk about disruptive innovation. Now, to define these, sustaining innovation is augmenting existing products, taking existing businesses, and innovating on top of them. Whereas disruptive innovation is looking at an industry and trying to fundamentally change it or displace it, like the iPhone displaced GPS. Now, most companies that I have worked with and been frustrated by try to innovate disruptively using the practices of sustaining innovation. Now, big companies are good at sustaining innovation. It's what they naturally tend towards. But disruptive innovation is somewhat backwards to how our day-to-days operate. Part of the problem is because of the way that we're judged in the stock market. We have quarterly deadlines. CEOs today have 10 years of 5 years or 10 years. And a disruptive innovation can take 10 years to see any return. So it's natural why companies are incentivized to innovate sustainably. However, while very few companies know and understand disruptive innovation, And today, we do have a process for it, and it is possible. And so in the next 30 minutes, I want to share with you this process so that your company can reach higher levels of growth, inspire your employees, and deliver better shareholder value. Because shareholder value is not just profit, it is also growth. So let's get on the same page about how disruptive innovation happens. This is a graph called the startup curve, and it's pretty well known, but if you haven't seen it. So happiness is on the y-axis, and time is on the x-axis. And before a startup, before disruptive innovation, remember, we're using these interchangeably, an individual's happiness is just average. So that's how you are every day. But then when you start on this journey, what happens? Happiness goes up. You get super enthusiastic. You can imagine an entrepreneur quitting his job and how excited that person must be to give up all that security. But yet, what happens as we go forward? Well, not good. Reality sets in, and we enter what's called the trough of sorrow. So this is where life is not very fun. You actually don't know if the actions and the energy you are putting forth every day are going to lead you to the dream that you have set out for yourself. Okay, it requires experimentation, it requires pivoting, and most companies fail here. Most corporate innovation projects trying to innovate disruptively fail here too. And very few projects find something that starts working and make it to the promised land of product market fit, where they look like an overnight success. They found a product that the market wants. So most startups fail in the trough of sorrow because they didn't find product market fit. They didn't find something that the market wants, not because they couldn't build the technology. Very few startups are building a futuristic technology from a science fiction movie. Very few of them are building a cure for cancer. Most of them are building websites and mobile applications where the technology has already been invented. And so, what are the activities and practices and processes we need to get through the trough of sorrow? Well, there's three, and the first one is the minimum viable products, plural. The idea of the minimum viable product is that if we're going to fail because we built the wrong thing, we didn't find a product the market wanted, we want to build the smallest product possible to learn if we are on the right path to what people want. And so another way to think about this is expending the minimum amount of effort to de-risk the market side of the product. Now let me give you an example. This is a tool called Quick MVP, and basically you can de-risk a lot of a business just by testing the value proposition on a landing page. If you want to see if customers even care about a product you've been thinking about and trying to build, the best thing to do is put up a landing page and see if anyone clicks on the Buy Now button before the product even exists. This takes one day, and you can learn actually some really profound things. You can learn, is there a customer need? What is the customer acquisition cost? We can observe this through Google AdWords. What is the margin? Which is the customer acquisition cost minus the price, and also the market size based on keyword search volume. Many of the most sophisticated entrepreneurs today use these techniques so that they don't overinvest in an idea nobody wants. Not only do they not overinvest their money, but their time, their passion, and their energy, which are much, much more precious. The second principle, the second process, is pivoting. So a pivot is a change in strategy without a change in vision. Almost every successful startup has had a pivot in its history. This means they went to market with something they thought was going to work, and they found out nobody wanted it. And they didn't expend all their time and energy and money on that single idea. They pivoted to what customers wanted. So Instagram actually started as a location-based social network. Twitter started as a podcasting website. PayPal started as payments over the Palm Pilot. YouTube started as a dating website, of all things. And Groupon started as an online petitioning website. All these startups started as one thing, thought it was the best idea since sliced bread, and then realized they were wrong and pivoted. The third idea is early adopters. So startups don't use traditional marketing techniques because they don't care about the mass market. They don't care about where the industry is today, they care about where the industry is going. So they only focus on a small subset of customers called early adopters. Early adopters are the people that are the leading edge of an industry, they're familiar with the problems, and they're almost about to create their own solution for it. So entrepreneurs rely on finding these early adopters, these visionary customers, and using their feedback to build their products. One of the biggest mistakes startups can make is not starting with early adopters. So fundamentally, what startups do is they're searching for something that people want. They're pivoting, they're experimenting. Whereas in a big company, we're used to execution. We're used to having a history of how the business works and operates, and using that playbook, executing it the best we can. But startups don't execute because they don't know what customers want. They're searching for something customers want, and that is the end goal. So this is a very new idea. In fact, if you or anyone in your company went to business school before 2010, then you would not have access to these courses that are now being taught on Lean Startup principles. At Harvard, they're teaching Lean Startup principles, and at Stanford, and at hundreds, if not thousands, of business schools around the world. So this is really a novel way of thinking about innovation. And it's also why companies like these are training their employees on Lean Startup and trying to figure out how to incorporate the methodologies into a process for disruptive innovation to achieve higher levels of growth. So in my experience, those three processes can easily be learned by all of you and other employees, but the things that are going to trip you up in doing this are the strategies and the ways of thinking that are tied to how sustaining innovation works as opposed to disruptive innovation, and the way that entrepreneurial individuals are compensated. These are the two biggest hurdles you will have in your company in implementing disruptive innovation. So I'm going to go through those, and then I'm going to go through the roadmap, which is the next best steps that I have seen work for companies to implement these principles. So there's three strategies. The first strategy is to realize that innovation is unpredictable. Disruptive innovation cannot be predicted by any expert. Yet most companies rely on experts who understand the industry for sustaining innovations. When we're trying to predict how the industry is going to change, there's no really expertise in that. It's an unwritten future. And so most companies try to have idea competitions where they have all the employees come up with ideas, and then they have experts choose the best ones. Now the problem with that is that they're definitely not choosing the right ideas because innovation is unpredictable. I don't care how much of an expert they are, it can't be predicted. And so in a company, we know that there must be a written plan, there must be a destination, and you must go there as fast as you can. But in a startup, we're trying to figure things out. We don't really know which path is right. So it's a process of elimination, a process of experimentation to find something that people want. The second principle is that small teams are most effective at disruptive innovation. There's just something called the 2 pizza rule that Jeff Bezos came up with, the founder of Amazon, that if your team is cannot be fed with 2 pizzas, it's too big. So the reason that small teams are more effective is because decision making is so important. The faster you make decisions, the more likely you are to be successful. So in startups, the ideal founding team is 2 people. And in fact, 3 people is harder than 2 people, even though you could do 33% more work. You have double the amount of communication channels. Instead of having to communicate with 1 business partner, I now have to communicate with 2 business partners. So you double the amount of communication to do 33% more work. 4 co-founders never works. And if you can't feed your team with 2 pizzas, they're too big of an innovation team. Now, as recently as 2010, companies have not taken this, have not realized this. So News Corp created an app called The Daily for the iPad. How did they go about creating this disruptive product for the media industry on a platform that the media industry has never seen before? Well, they hired 100 people. They invested $25 million to build 1 iPad app. An iPad app does not take 100 people to build. So this product went to market and it failed. They would have been more successful because if they had just funded, let's say, 20 teams, 5 people each, making different iPad apps. The daily was actually had too many features, it was overbuilt. They didn't use a landing page to test it, I promise you. They thought they used sustaining innovation principles to see a plan and execute on that plan, even if it was wrong. So the third idea is that sample size really matters when it comes to disruptive innovation. Because it's a process of elimination and experimentation, you need a large enough sample size to get returns. Anyone who is familiar with the venture capital industry knows that when professional investors make 10 investments, one of those investments is going to pay for all the rest. So the other 9 are the cost of doing business in the venture capital industry. The majority of returns come from one investment. This is also the $40 billion startups. As you notice, Facebook, being a similar age to all of these, is actually 200 billion. This almost, this maxes at 30 billion. So it's actually way higher than this projector screen if you actually found the top of it. So you can see that this is actually called the power law of returns, where if you look at early stage innovation, the sample size you need increases dramatically because the risk increases dramatically. So in Y Combinator, which is a Silicon Valley accelerator, they've made 1,000 investments, and they have 2 successes, Dropbox and Airbnb. Now Dropbox, their portfolio follows this rule. Dropbox is worth more than all the other companies combined. Out of 1,000 investments, one is worth more than all the others combined. And if you look at the second most valuable one and take out the first most valuable one, it's worth more than everything combined. So it follows this power law of returns. You have to have enough sample size to have returns. And most corporations that I talk to, because they're used to innovating sustainably, want to have one project. And they want that one project to be successful in order to have a second project. Yet no venture capitalist in the world could be successful with that model, because you have to make many bets to get any returns. So those were the 3 strategies. Innovation is unpredictable, small teams win, and you need a large sample size. Let's go into compensation. So someone shout out who they think is the most innovative company in the world. And if you heard me talk yesterday, don't play the game. What's the most valuable, most innovative company in the world? And just shout something. Just Google. Great. That was the one I was looking for. That was you? What's your name? Anya. Thank you so much. So Google is pretty innovative, right? I mean, most companies would like to be as innovative as Google. But yet Google has some serious dirty laundry. They have let go some of the most successful entrepreneurs in the last 20 years. Former Google employees created businesses like Twitter, Foursquare, Instagram, Asana, Pinterest, all billion-dollar startups. The founder of Twitter actually left $2 million in stock options in Google on the table, and it wasn't Twitter, it was a podcasting startup, remember? So this isn't just Silicon Valley. In fact, the average tech entrepreneur has 13 years of work experience. Not like the media tells us about all these college kids. The average entrepreneur has 13 years of work experience, and the companies above were founded by people who worked at the corporations below. So we are all hemorrhaging innovative people. And one of the reasons, one of the causes here, we have to look at what causes this, is people like to say that entrepreneurs are risk takers. That's why they left the company, because they're risk takers. But no study has ever been able to scientifically prove that entrepreneurs have a lower degree of risk aversion. They've done lots of studies and tests on this to see, do people who start businesses, do they have more of a risk appetite? Is there something different about them? It's actually not true. But there was a study done by Harvard on 27,000 individuals that showed a big difference in how entrepreneurial employees versus normal employees think. What it showed is that they value different rewards for their work. So employees, they studied 13 different types of rewards. Employees valued most security and recognition. We know this. This is pretty clear. But what entrepreneurs value is power and control, okay? Power can mean influence, wealth, control, autonomy. These are the things they value the most. They seek as a reward for their efforts. Now, how do entrepreneurs feel about the other two rewards? Well, they're dead last. So the rewards profile is flipped for these two individuals. And this can change over someone's lifetime. This can really change because the average entrepreneur has 13 years of work experience. Now, Chris Dixon is an investor at Andreessen Horowitz, and he was talking to the founder of Instagram, who left Google, and he was saying, why don't these smart people leave Google? Google has such a good culture, they're so innovative, they're so supportive. Why do they leave to start their businesses? Why isn't it easier to work with Google to start a business? And so what they came to the conclusion is that ownership is why you stay up all night. It's why you think about this all day, every day. Stock options in a large corporation can never feel like ownership. So, I know you're getting a little scared. This presentation does scare people. And you might be asking, can't we take people who don't want, can't we take other people who don't care about ownership and make them more innovative? Can't we do that? Well, the issue with that is that the research shows that extrinsic rewards are actually harmful to creative work. So extrinsic rewards, such as a salary, are perfectly fine for work where the goals are clear and the destination is known. But in a startup, this is the most complex type of work that the human mind is capable of. Understanding these macro events and trying to predict where they're going. So by compensating an innovator with extrinsic rewards, we're actually hurting their ability to be successful. Now, we know that we would never pay a salesperson 100% on salary, right? That wouldn't be a good decision because they need commission to be motivated and to perform at their best. We've been doing this for decades now. But we're perfectly fine compensating these people who are entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs with a salary and no skin in the game. So this is going to change, I promise you. Now, this is also why, in my belief, that many of the corporate innovation structures have been failing time after time after time. Most of the successful innovations at corporations is based on sustaining innovation or based on a high degree of technical risk, like Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, building a new jet plane. That is a high degree of technical risk, not a high degree of market risk. So for market risk, we need this type of compensation, and there actually are examples of companies doing this. And we call this approach innovation colony. Just like in the colonial era, these established countries were seeking economic advantage and growth. And so colonists sailed to distant shores, they took a risk in order to gain power and control in the new world. Many returned with nothing. Some people died, but those who stayed and succeeded founded new nations, right? Entrepreneurs, lots of them fail. That is the reality. But it's a gamble that people are willing to take. And so the innovation colony approach, in addition to giving employees performance-based compensation, like equity, it also gives them independence. It gives them the ability to allocate resources, to change direction and pivot without approval, and to seek outside capital and expertise. And these are absolutely key to being a successful disruptive innovation. In fact, it's something that startups do that they would never even question. So, what I'm trying to say here is that the probability of success is directly tied to independence. Because if you're navigating the trough of sorrow, everything slowing you down is a cost. It's depleting your energy, your passion, and you're not learning fast enough to find something people want and seize an opportunity. These new markets appear rapidly. Entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs have to respond quickly. So the probability of success, internal groups doing disruptive innovation, almost zero. Better is independent groups internally. The best is separate legal entities. Let me give you an example. So another quiz, who can guess where this product was invented? Or who knows where this product was invented? No. What company? Yes. Xerox invented the graphical user interface in the mouse. Steve Jobs just said, hey guys, you're not using this, can I borrow it? And they said, sure Steve, we're not using it. And now Apple is the world's most valuable company, and Xerox is still doing copiers. But this isn't the only example. In fact, has anyone here heard of Ethernet? Ethernet was also invented in Xerox. And the researchers said, hey, we really want to bring this to market. This could be a new business for Xerox. And they said, the business leader said, you know what, we don't really see that being the market future by our expert opinion. So it's not really core to our competency, but if you want to just, keep the IP, there's no, we're not going to sue you for doing it outside of the business. And so that's how 3Com was built, that created Ethernet. Adobe, as well, was two researchers at Xerox during the same time who said, we're really interested in this graphical software. Would you mind funding us? This could be a big business unit. And the business leader said, by our expert opinion, this is not really a future market, and it's not core to our competency. So go ahead and, we're not going to sue you if you leave and decide to start this. So very, very expensive mistakes. Now, a few years later, two McKinsey consultants wrote a book about how terrible this was. And so Xerox didn't really act until the book came out, oddly. And what they did was they created a fund called Xerox Technology Ventures. Now, this is different from most corporate venture capital efforts, and I'm going to explain why. So, as opposed to most corporate venture arms that aim to find sustaining innovations to their business units, this fund was created to spin out technologies that the leadership didn't think was core to what they're doing today. In the off chance that they were wrong, and they could get a chance to acquire the business back, or at least be a part of it strategically. So they give them $30 million in funding, which is in 1989 is like 2 servers. It's like not very much. And they had a lot of privileges, almost like a business unit. They had a lot of internal leverage, and they had a lot of independence. They were allowed to write a $2 million check with no approval from anyone. They could write up a $2 million check with no approval. And they would find researchers inside the company, brilliant people like are in all the companies that you work with, and give them a chance. Write them a check. They would seek outside capital. They would seek outside CEOs, and they would build the business outside, using sort of a partnership with Xerox, using sales channels, using whatever access they could get. And so they were new legal companies. Xerox owned 80%, and that's the wrong image, but the researchers owned 20% of these spin-out entities. And 7 years later, the value of the companies that they funded, 7 years later, this is crazy, had the same market cap combined as Xerox, just 7 years later. Guess what happened 5 years later? Those companies were worth 10 times more than Xerox, right? Unfortunately, Xerox didn't keep the same 80% level. They did acquire a few of the companies back that were complementary to their existing businesses. They did acquire some of the businesses back, but they failed to really build these businesses into future business units and to break new grounds with them. And so at the same time they accomplished this, more money was spent on internal groups. They invested more money in internal groups, $35 million. And what was the results of those internal innovations that were inside the bureaucracy, inside the corporation? Well, they all failed. They spent more money and all those inventions failed. So here's another example. So this is a more recent example, Microsoft's corporate accelerator. And I'm a big proponent of corporate accelerators. I think they are the future, and that every company will have a corporate accelerator. So $2 million in funding to fund 20 companies. Every company I've been to I worked with has spent at least $2 million on one internal company that failed. And so $2 million on 20 companies working with startups outside the company and researchers that are leaving and funding them outside. And they make a 20K investment. This is nothing. And they form new legal companies where Microsoft owns 7% and the geeks own 93%. So 3 months later, these businesses have 3 months to get to market and to pitch outside investors. These 20 companies funded for $2 million, which some of this costs went into operational costs as well. You'll notice that 20 times 20K is less than $2 million. The rest of the money went to operational costs. They raised $20 million in funding. So the 75% success rate with this outside of the corporate walls, where I have never heard of a corporate internal project that got to market in 3 months and warranted enough traction to raise more funding at the level that these companies did. So an average of $1 million each. Now, this is one of the most interesting things. So there was a company called Metrics Hub that was in the program. And it was actually one of a former Microsoft employee who had quit, and he saw the accelerator, he applied, got in, and he went back to his friends in the company, and he convinced him to quit too, to join him. And in 3 months, they got traction, they got customers, they got to market, they built a product, they did everything, and they got a $5 million term sheet from investors. Investors that are private, professional investors, valued these companies, valued the company at $5 million. This is something that internal innovation is not possible with internal innovation because there's not an internal market for innovation. Because we have the private market for innovation, investors see hundreds of companies, they're able to value them appropriately. And this product was actually very relevant to Microsoft. It was almost a sustaining innovation for them. And so what did they do? They offered to buy it. They went to the entrepreneurs, they offered in the range of the valuation, and the entrepreneurs thought that was great. I mean, they didn't put very much effort into it, and now they're going to be able to lead this product inside Microsoft. And this product, Metrics Hub, is now the back-end dashboard for Azure. Wrong photo. Azure Cloud Services, which is an $11 billion a year business for Microsoft. So in 3 months, the entrepreneurs got a great outcome, and Microsoft got an incredible outcome, having a huge part of their $11 billion a year business. And had they not wanted to acquire Metrics Hub, they could have continued on their own and had their own freedom to make the company successful. Okay, so that was the strategy and the compensation. I hope you guys aren't too scared. I'm going to explain how to actually get the momentum inside your company. Oh my God. So, the rest of my slides are, I guess, broken. The number one thing in getting the momentum inside your company is training around disruptive innovation. I have worked with many companies where they do small trainings and it leads to no momentum. Many of these principles that I've showed you are so new, they haven't been taught in business schools until 2010, that we just don't have the same perspective as to how it works. We nod and you guys are all saying this is interesting, but when you actually go through an experience of creating an MVP, putting it out there and finding out nobody wants it, and you believed in that product so deeply, well, you can't imagine what that feels like. You can't imagine what it feels like to have your plan shattered in one day and then have to pivot. You can't imagine that. And so having at least 30% of your workforce go through an immersive lean startup training is the only thing that I have seen to be successful to create momentum. I have worked with many companies doing small trainings, and I follow up a year later only to find that my contact no longer works with the company because there was no momentum for innovation. By sort of using a Trojan horse strategy of getting people through an experience, you convince their subconscious mind about what the next steps are, and things naturally fall into place. And companies that have done this, I have seen build new businesses in record times that they knew was never possible before they had the collective consciousness to do this. The second thing is set up a space for independent groups. Set up a structure created specifically to create independent groups, innovation colony. Manage manage these groups by shielding them from the bureaucracy and giving them independence to pivot, allocate resources, and help them raise outside funding. Many businesses are hacking this process because they don't have the sheer number of innovators that you need for this model to work by working with startups, partnering with startups in a model like the corporate accelerator. And finally, this is the dream. This is where we want to go. This is where the future corporation needs to be, is that the corporate accelerator model is not one of a marketing function for ecosystem development. It's not a model for business development, for pure sustaining innovation. It's actually an investment model to achieve levels of growth that our company was previously not able to achieve. And so companies like Intuit and GE are very focused on creating innovation flow, which is creating the talent inside your company and the ideas inside your company that are worthy of being funded and incubated into new businesses. And so the top of the funnel is always a validated product. In people's spare time and unstructured time, they need to turn their ideas into validated experiments. You don't want them to just come to you with an idea. You want them to come to you with a validated product that has customers, that has data, and they've been pivoting on their own time. And then you select them into the innovation colony, and from there they raise more funding from outside investors and potentially inside investors to the company. Finally, these businesses mature to where they're perfect for an acquisition, and they can become a future business unit in your company. So that's all I have. Thank you all so much. Dziękuję.
Any questions?
One of the things I want to ask is actually, do you think that VC funding is required for the company to grow, or is it better to actually go with the organic growth immediately? Not splitting the capital of the company and the equity.
Yeah, I think if you are on the corporate side, then capital should definitely be your ultimate goal, because your goal is to reach massive scale for these businesses, and you can't do that without capital. For an entrepreneur, my recommendation is not the same. For an entrepreneur, you want to maximize your opportunity for liquidity and your exit opportunities. Most of the M&A market is between the $25 million to $100 million range. The vast majority, most of it is the $25 million mark. And raising more capital prevents you from exiting at those opportunities. So for entrepreneurs, I think you have to make the decision carefully. For corporates, the businesses you are funding are trying to reach venture scale, and you're trying to go big or go home.
Any other questions?
This presentation always gets a sort of scared emotion at the end, but my goal was not to sugarcoat anything, and I know Polish people are very direct, so from what I understand. Is that wrong?
Do you know if we can go again to Xerox and ask them if they are not using some of the technology?
Say again?
Do you know if we can go to Xerox and ask them if they are not using some of their technology?
Probably.
I have a question practically. When those people go back to their bosses and say they should set up an innovation colony and they want to take shares or give shares to employees, what advice would you give them? Because it might be that the CEO will earn less than the employees when they make it big.
Yeah. So part of the problem with the spin-out model back in the 80s and the 90s is that many of the people that practice spin-outs made more money than the CEOs of the companies that they spun out the technology from. And so you have to compensate the leadership of a company for innovation and for growth on that small scale in addition to the share price. So if you're not compensating your leadership for innovation, then there's no incentive to innovate. It's more important to focus on what you can do in 3 months than it is to focus on maybe we can double our company in 5 or 10 years. The iPhone is the majority of Apple's revenue, and it's one of the newest products. So these disruptive innovations can become bigger than the existing businesses that your CEO loves today.
Any other questions?
I would also comment that the sort of degree of acceptance of the science behind this is scary, but this is already happening. It may not be talked about how wrong things are being done, but the corporate accelerators are already happening. More and more companies are creating corporate accelerators, and that's the genesis of the innovation colony. Most of the time, I see it being a marketing function. Because most of the time when I see corporate accelerators being, because marketing departments have budget and they want to work with startups. And so one of the ways, if you can't get your CEO to come and hear me talk or hear someone talk about this and give the examples, try to train people in your company and use a low-hanging fruit approach to build momentum. It's not about going head first into the pool, it's about taking one step. The first step of a 2,000-mile journey, as they say.
I have a question connected with the human part, because there is the fact that there are team dynamics, there are different processes, different ways of working. What would you recommend to the leadership team, the executives, to start to get everything to move forward? Knowing that there is element, organizational culture issues and stuff like this.
Yeah. So I believe that because most innovation projects they're not giving their employees the type of compensation that entrepreneurial individuals would naturally self-select into, that many of them are staffed with the wrong people. Culture, fundamentally, is about the individuals and how they form the collective. And the individuals self-select based on the compensation. So when people talk about culture, it's a big nebulous buzzword, but the foundation of it is the structure and the rules and the compensation from which you place people into. So on the team level, as I mentioned, you need to have small teams, and I think there's a couple great books about the process and the teams that you can read. One is called The Founder's Dilemmas. This is the best book about entrepreneurial founding teams. It's done by a professor at Harvard who studied 10 years founding teams. It's one of the most underrated books, nobody knows about it. And then of course, Lean Startup. So the process is already there, and you can learn the process. But I've seen teams do every single thing right, but were shut down because the right structure was not in place.
I have one more question for you. One of the things that you mentioned is about co-founding and getting the right group as you place. What do you think about one-person startups where where pretty much where you don't have a co-founder, you just have a team under you?
Yeah.
Which is actually something that you were referring to about holding the control and
Yeah, I think it's not as black and white as like one co-founder and other non-co-founders, because every company, every startup, you'll see multiple co-founders, and you don't know what their equity percentages are or to what degree the CEO is the real entrepreneur. So it's hard to say that. Most people say like one person co-founding teams are really bad, and I agree with that. I think that, but I also agree that some entrepreneurs can hire their co-founders. There's a lot of entrepreneurs who've successfully done that, where it's not like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, where they came to the idea at the same time. It's one person gets traction, recruits someone to be sort of the head of the company with him or her at an early stage, gives that person significant equity in the co-founder title. So I think it can work.
Could you please elaborate a little bit more in terms of the innovation startups evaluation versus the regular business KPIs, and then in terms of the business casing and making
make a decision about a startup? Because presume that the approach should be totally different than the daily business.
Yeah. So the hard thing about disruptive innovation is that there's no such thing as benchmarks. So defining success requires a lot of intuition. This is, while the lean startup advocates for a scientific approach to innovation, the majority of it is still judgment and intuition. And so for most businesses, the business plan is what you evaluate. However, almost every business plan is wrong because almost every startup pivots. And so if you evaluated Twitter, the business plan as the podcasting website, you might not have invested and you might have made a multi-billion-dollar mistake. Now, what you want to see is that the individuals can get traction, that they can get customers at a certain rate, and that even though they're growing on a small scale, that growth is consistent and that growth is accelerating. So that's really what you're looking for in terms of holding startups accountable, is continued growth, and you can go deeper to look at the behavioral metrics of the product. Now, I can do a whole session on behavioral metrics versus the vanity metrics, but the core you have to understand is that you want to watch what startups do, not what they say they're going to do, because whatever they say is just a guess. And when they really get to market, you want to see the team is actually able to pivot when things are failing. You want to see that there is no delusion in what they're doing, because you can evaluate any metric as positive or negative, especially when there's no benchmarks. So you want to see proper judgment and proper execution and the ability to pivot. If a startup has been in operation for a year and they're doing the same thing, and there's been no growth for a year, and they haven't pivoted, that should be a warning sign, because it shows maybe people are not motivated by profit and turning this into business, they're just motivated by sort of a delusion for that. Lots and lots of entrepreneurs are delusional. Because as human beings, we have confirmation bias. And there's never going to be a 100% someone telling you for a fact, this is a bad idea. You have to be able to self-organize.
Last question for
Hi, I'm Gaza. I would like to ask you, did I understand correctly, is Lean Startup working better when you put people outside of the company?
Yes, definitely.
Than rather keep them within the scope, even
Yes.
helping?
Yes. I think that the way that companies can help startups the best is through mentorship, not resources. Because startups need to figure things out, and if you try to give them distribution too early, you're just wasting the distribution because they don't have anything people want. So 2/3 of a startup's life is getting ready for mass distribution. 2/3 of the life. The first third is finding product market fit. The second third is optimizing the sign-up flow, optimizing the customer experience. So really, where big companies want to acquire startups is after the first third, after the second third, when they're ready for that distribution. And actually, most corporations' acquisitions are driven by partnerships where they're already seeing revenue. So partnering with lots of startups, giving them distribution to prove that the distribution is working is a sign that the acquisition is meant to be.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.